The lightning split the sky like a knife wound, illuminating the mansion gates in stark white flashes that made the shadows dance and twist. Rain hammered against marble and steel, turning the circular driveway into a black mirror that reflected the storm's fury. At precisely midnight, the security system shrieked its alert, cutting through the thunder with electronic insistence. Armed men poured from the house, weapons drawn, expecting threats they were trained to eliminate. Instead, they found a basket. He emerged from the mansion's entrance with the deliberate calm of someone who'd walked through worse storms than this. The white hair that had earned him his reputation hung loose around his face, plastered against his skin by rain within seconds. His black shirt clung to the lean muscle underneath, sleeves rolled to his elbows, exposing the intricate tattoos that crawled up his forearms like dark vines. When lightning flashed again, the ink on his neck became visible, symbols that marked him as something more dangerous than the storm could ever be. The basket sat centered on the driveway, water pooling around it but not quite touching the woven sides. Someone had placed it carefully, deliberately. A crying baby's wail cut through the rain and thunder, sharp and insistent and impossible to ignore. His men stood frozen, guns trained on the basket as if an infant might explode. None of them moved. None of them knew what to do when the threat was wrapped in expensive fabric and screaming with the raw desperation only newborns possessed. But the maid who'd been tidying the entrance hall when the alarm sounded didn't hesitate. She pushed past the armed men without fear, her simple uniform already soaked through as she knelt beside the basket. Her hands were gentle as she lifted the baby, pulling it against her chest with the instinctive care of someone who understood fragility. The crying stopped instantly, completely, as if the child had been waiting for exactly those hands to find it. He watched this with the same empty expression he wore when ordering executions, but something flickered in his eyes when he approached, when he saw the baby's face for the first time. The child couldn't be more than a few weeks old, skin still holding that newborn redness, eyes unfocused but searching. And there on the baby's left shoulder was a birthmark, not random, not shapeless. It matched perfectly the symbol tattooed on his own neck. The same curved lines, the same distinctive shape, the same mark that identified him across every criminal network in the country. His hand moved without conscious thought, fingers brushing the edge of the basket. That's when he saw the note, tucked beneath the fabric, written in handwriting he recognized despite years of trying to forget it. 4 words that hit harder than bullets ever had. Raise what you destroyed. Inside the basket, beneath where the baby had lain, was a gold bracelet, small enough for an infant's wrist, engraved with his surname in characters that left no room for doubt or denial. The maid looked up at him with questions in her eyes, rain streaming down her face, the baby now quiet and seemingly content against her shoulder. His men waited for orders, their expressions carefully blank, trained never to show shock even when their boss was confronted with apparent offspring. He spoke finally, his voice cutting through the rain with the same authority that commanded empires. Inside, all of you. He didn't touch the baby, didn't reach for it, just turned and walked back into the mansion, water dripping from his white hair, leaving wet footprints on marble floors that someone else would clean. The maid followed, cradling the child with practiced ease, while his men secured the perimeter and tried to make sense of what had just happened. In the mansion's main hall, under chandelier light that seemed too bright after the storm's darkness, he finally stopped, turned, looked at the baby properly. The child was watching him with that unfocused infant gaze, but something in its expression seemed knowing, aware. The birthmark was even more prominent under the lights, an exact replica of the symbol he'd chosen years ago to mark himself as untouchable, unreachable, someone who belonged to violence and nothing else. DNA test, he said to no one in particular, knowing someone would make it happen. Immediately. I want results within 24 hours. The maid shifted the baby slightly, adjusting her grip, and asked the question everyone was thinking but only she was brave enough to voice. What if the test confirms what the note suggests? His eyes met hers for the first time since she'd picked up the child. They were glacier cold, empty of everything except the calculation that had kept him alive in a world designed to kill people like him. Then I'll deal with what I've created. She didn't flinch under his stare. Most people did. Most people couldn't hold his gaze for more than seconds before their survival instincts kicked in and forced them to look away. But she'd been working in his household for 8 months, and she'd learned that his violence was selective, purposeful, never random, never directed at those who served him with loyalty and silence. "The child needs care," she said practically, her tone suggesting this was merely logistics rather than emotion. "Formula, diapers, a proper crib, medical examination." He nodded once, a gesture so slight it barely registered as agreement. "Handle it, everything the child needs, spare no expense." Then, because something in him recognized that this moment required more than cold efficiency, he added, "Thank you for not hesitating." It was possibly the first time she'd heard him express gratitude. The words sat strange in the space between them, almost uncomfortable in their sincerity. The baby made a soft sound, not quite crying but close, and the maid rocked gently, soothing without thinking. His eyes tracked the movement, watching how naturally she held the child, how easily she provided comfort. Something flickered across his face. Not quite emotion, but not quite nothing either. He moved closer then, close enough that she could smell the rain on him mixed with expensive cologne. Close enough to see the individual tattooed symbols on his neck, each one representing something destroyed or conquered. His hand lifted slowly, deliberately, and extended toward the baby. The child's tiny fingers found his automatically, wrapping around his tattooed index finger with surprising strength. They stood like that for a moment, connected by the baby's grip, the maid watching him watch the child, both of them silent while the storm continued to rage outside. Then he pulled away, the moment broken, his expression returning to its usual emptiness. "I need to make calls, secure the perimeter. If someone left a child here, they're either desperate or sending a message, possibly both." He walked toward his office, then paused at the doorway without turning back. "Keep the child close. Don't let it out of your sight. Trust no one else in this house with its safety." The implication was clear. He trusted her. In a world where trust was currency more valuable than gold, he just made her rich. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of activity that the household had never experienced before. The mansion, usually a fortress of calculated silence broken only by the sounds of business and violence, now echoed with an infant's cries at odd hours. The maid, whose name was Alina though few people in the house knew it, found herself transformed from invisible staff into something else entirely. She set up a nursery in a guest room near the main suite, working with efficient grace while armed men stood guard outside. She fed the baby, changed it, soothed it when it cried, all while aware that she was being watched, not just by security, by him. He appeared at unexpected moments, 3 in the morning while she was warming formula, 6 in the evening during a diaper change, noon while she sang softly to get the baby to sleep. He never announced himself. Just materialized in doorways like a ghost, his white hair catching light, his tattooed hands usually holding a phone or documents but always pausing whatever work consumed him to observe. He didn't offer to help, didn't ask questions, just watched with that empty expression that revealed nothing and everything simultaneously. On the 3rd day, Alina found him standing over the crib at dawn, the baby sleeping peacefully, his tattooed hand resting on the crib's edge. She'd entered to check on the child and found him there, utterly still, staring at the sleeping infant with an intensity that suggested he was trying to solve an impossible equation. "You should sleep," she said quietly, not wanting to startle him, though she suspected nothing truly startled him. "People who don't sleep make mistakes." He didn't look at her. "I don't have the luxury of mistakes." "Everyone makes mistakes," Alina replied, moving to adjust the baby's blanket. "The difference is whether you survive them." That made him turn his head slightly, acknowledging her with the bare minimum of movement. "Is that philosophy or experience?" "Both." She straightened, meeting his eyes again with that same lack of fear that had caught his attention from the beginning. "I've made plenty of mistakes. I'm still here." That suggests either luck or learning. Something almost like amusement flickered in his expression. "Which do you think it is?" Learning, luck runs out, knowledge compounds. He nodded slowly as if she'd confirmed something he already suspected. Then he did something unexpected. He reached into the crib, his tattooed hand moving with surprising gentleness, and touched the baby's cheek with one finger. The child stirred but didn't wake, tiny face turning toward the touch instinctively. "The birthmark," he said, his voice lower than usual, almost contemplative. "It's identical to my mark, not similar, identical down to the smallest detail." Alina had noticed this too, had spent hours studying both the tattoo on his neck and the birthmark on the baby's shoulder, comparing them obsessively. "That's not coincidence." "No, it's not." He pulled his hand back, but his eyes remained on the child. "Which means either this is my blood, or someone went to extraordinary lengths to make it appear that way." The DNA results arrived at noon that day, delivered by a private lab that asked no questions and kept no records. He opened the sealed envelope in his office with Alina present, having called her there without explanation. She stood near the door, uncertain why she'd been summoned, while he read the document with the same expression he wore reviewing execution orders. The silence stretched until it became almost unbearable. Then he set the paper down on his desk with deliberate care. 99.9% probability, he said, his voice completely flat. "The child is mine." Alina felt something shift in her chest, not surprise. She'd suspected from the moment she'd seen the birthmark, but confirmation made it real in a way speculation never could. "What will you do?" He stood, walked to the window overlooking the grounds, his back to her, hands clasped behind him in a posture that made the tattoos on his forearms fully visible. "I don't know how to be a father. I barely know how to be human. Everything I touch turns to violence or ash, sometimes both." It was the most honest thing she'd heard him say, the most vulnerable. "The child doesn't know that," Alina said carefully. "The child only knows that it's been abandoned once already. What happens next determines everything." He turned then, and his eyes held something she'd never seen before. Not quite emotion, but not quite empty either. Something raw and uncertain and almost painful. "Why did you pick up the basket?" The question caught her off guard. "What?" In the storm, with armed men surrounding it, with no idea what was inside or what danger it represented. "Why did you pick it up without hesitation?" Alina considered this. "Because I heard crying, because something needed help, because I could provide it." She paused. "Because sometimes you have to act before you think, or you'll never act at all." He studied her for a long moment, and she felt assessed down to her molecular structure. Then he nodded slowly. "The child stays, you care for it, I'll provide everything necessary, protection, resources, whatever it needs." "And you?" Alina asked boldly. "What will you provide beyond money and security?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'll provide what I can, which may not be enough." Before Alina could respond, his phone erupted with alerts, multiple messages. Urgent. His expression shuddered immediately, returning to the cold efficiency she knew better. He read quickly, his face revealing nothing, but something in his posture shifted, became more dangerous. "Spread the word," he said, his voice dropping to the lethal quiet that preceded violence. "The white-haired devil has a child. Let them know. Let them all know." Alina felt cold understanding wash over her. By acknowledging the baby, he just made it a target. Every enemy, every rival, every ambitious subordinate would see the child as leverage, as weakness, as opportunity. "You're painting a target on an infant," she said, unable to keep the accusation from her tone. His eyes met hers, and they were completely empty again. All that momentary vulnerability erased. "I'm establishing ownership. There's a difference. If I hide the child, it becomes a secret. Secrets can be exploited. But if I claim it openly, make it known that anyone who touches what's mine will face consequences beyond comprehension, then the child becomes untouchable. Or it becomes the ultimate prize for anyone brave enough to try," Alina countered. "Let them try." The words carried absolute certainty, absolute promise of retribution. "I've built this empire on the understanding that touching what's mine means death. Not quick. Not clean, death that serves as warning to everyone else. The child is mine now. That protection extends accordingly." He walked toward the door, then paused beside her, close enough that she could see individual ink strokes in his neck tattoos, close enough to smell the subtle cologne that couldn't quite mask the scent of violence that clung to him like a second skin. But you're right about one thing. The child is now a target, which means you are too. Anyone wanting to hurt me will recognize that hurting what the child needs is equally effective. His hand lifted, and she thought for a moment he might touch her. Instead, he gestured to the small wound on his palm from the baby's surprisingly sharp grip. Stay close. Trust no one. If you sense danger, your job is to protect the child first. Your own safety second. Everything else is irrelevant. Then he was gone, leaving Alina alone in his office with the realization that her life had just fundamentally changed. She was no longer invisible staff. She was connected to something dangerous in a way she couldn't escape even if she wanted to. If you're invested in this story, hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss what happens next. Drop a comment telling us what you think about this white-haired devil and the baby that appeared in the storm. And smash that like button if you're ready to see where this dangerous journey leads. The assassination attempt came 4 days later, during the brief window between midnight and dawn when even predators sometimes sleep. Alina was feeding the baby in the nursery, exhaustion making her movements slow but no less careful, when she heard the sound that didn't belong. Not loud, not obvious, just wrong. A whisper of movement where silence should have been. She reacted on instinct honed by 8 months in a house where danger was ambient, setting the baby in the crib and moving toward the door. Before she reached it, gunfire erupted. Not the controlled bursts of professional security, the wild spray of attackers who valued destruction over precision. Alina grabbed the baby without thought, her body curling around the tiny form instinctively, making herself a shield. She dove behind the heavy dresser as bullets punched through walls, sending plaster dust into the air like snow. The baby screamed and Alina pressed it closer, her hand protecting the small head, her body absorbing the impact as she hit the floor harder than intended. Something burned across her shoulder, hot and sharp and wrong. She'd been grazed by a bullet, the impact spinning her slightly as she landed. Blood spread across her uniform, dark and immediate, but she didn't let go of the baby. Didn't even consider it. The gunfire stopped as suddenly as it started, shouting in multiple languages. Running footsteps, then silence more terrifying than the violence had been. Alina stayed behind the dresser, her shoulder screaming pain, the baby crying against her chest, waiting for whatever came next. What came next was him. He appeared in the doorway like death incarnate, white hair now streaked with red mist that could only be blood, his hands empty but somehow more threatening than if he'd been armed. His eyes found her immediately, tracked to the blood on her shoulder, then to the baby still clutched protectively in her arms. Something happened to his face then. Some expression she couldn't name but recognized as dangerous in ways that transcended normal violence. He crossed the room in 3 strides, knelt beside her with surprising gentleness, and checked the baby first. His tattooed hands moved over the infant's tiny body with unexpected care, searching for wounds, his jaw clenched so tightly she could see muscle jumping beneath skin. "The baby's fine," Alina managed, her voice shaking from adrenaline and pain. "Just scared, just crying, it's fine." Only then did he look at her shoulder, at the wound still bleeding through her uniform. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went absolutely cold. Not empty cold, fury cold, the kind of cold that preceded calculated brutality. "Who shot you?" His voice was utterly calm, which somehow made it more terrifying. "I don't know, I didn't see, just heard them, then bullets then." She gestured vaguely at her shoulder. "It's not deep, just grazed me, I'm fine." "You're bleeding." It was a statement of fact delivered with the same tone he might use to discuss weather. "You put yourself between my child and death. You're bleeding because you protected what's mine. That requires response." He stood and she saw the blood on his shirt now, saw the way it dripped from his fingers, saw the cold calculation in his eyes that suggested whoever had attacked was experiencing consequences beyond comprehension. "Stay here. My men are securing the house. Medical team is en route. They'll handle your shoulder." He moved toward the door, then stopped, looked back at her still on the floor, still holding the baby, still bleeding. "Alina." It was the first time he'd said her name. The first time he'd acknowledged her as a person rather than a function. Thank you for not letting go. Then he was gone, and she was alone with the screaming baby and the burning pain in her shoulder, and the realization that she'd just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She'd chosen this child's life over her own safety. She'd made herself matter in a house where mattering was dangerous. The medical team arrived within minutes, professionals who asked no questions and made no comments about the blood or the bullets or the crying baby. They cleaned and stitched Alina's shoulder with efficient competence while she held the infant with her good arm, refusing to put the child down even for medical treatment. The baby eventually quieted, exhausted by crying, falling into the fitful sleep of trauma survived but not understood. Alina sat in the nursery chair, her shoulder bandaged and throbbing, the baby finally peaceful against her chest, and wondered what fresh hell she'd invited into her life. He returned at dawn, his white hair clean now but still damp from whatever shower he'd taken to wash away evidence. His clothes were different, the blood was gone, but something in his eyes remained absolutely lethal. 4 attackers, he said without preamble, standing in the nursery doorway. Hired mercenaries, low-level, cannon fodder sent to probe defenses and test response time. They succeeded in both, which means whoever sent them now has valuable intelligence. Alina shifted carefully, mindful of her shoulder. What did you do to them? What was necessary? The lack of detail was answer enough. What was necessary to ensure their employers understand the cost of targeting what's mine? He moved into the room, his eyes on the sleeping baby, his expression unreadable. I need to know something, and I need you to answer honestly. Alina waited, uncertain what question could possibly matter more than assassination attempts and infant targets. The bullets started. Why didn't you run? Why didn't you put the baby down and save yourself? You could have, should have. Any rational person would have prioritized their own survival. The question hung between them, heavy with implications Alina didn't fully understand. She thought about it carefully before answering. Because the baby couldn't protect itself, because I could. Because in that moment its life mattered more than mine. I don't know if that's rational. I don't know if it's smart, but it's true. He stared at her for a long moment, something working behind his empty eyes, some calculation or realization she wasn't privy to. Then he did something completely unexpected. He knelt beside her chair, bringing himself to eye level, close enough that she could count the individual tattooed symbols on his neck. I'm going to tell you something I've told very few people, something that explains why that baby exists, why someone left it on my doorstep with a note about destruction. Why this is more complicated than a simple paternity situation. Alina waited, her heart beating faster despite the exhaustion and pain. Years ago, there was a woman from a rival family, beautiful, intelligent, dangerous in her own right. Our families arranged an alliance through marriage, political necessity masquerading as romance. I went through with it because I saw the strategic advantage, because I thought I could maintain emotional distance while reaping practical benefits. His jaw tightened, and for the first time since she'd known him, Alina saw something almost like regret flicker across his face. I was wrong. She wanted more than I could give, wanted love and devotion and all the things I'd carved out of myself to survive this life. When I couldn't provide them, when she realized I'd married her for strategy rather than affection, she betrayed the alliance, gave information to our enemies, caused deaths, threatened everything I'd built. He paused, and his voice dropped even lower. So I destroyed her family, completely, systematically, left nothing standing, made them an example of what happens when people betray me. It was necessary, brutal but necessary, or so I believed. Understanding crashed over Alina like cold water. She was pregnant. I never knew. She never told me. By the time I ordered the massacre, she'd already disappeared. I assumed she'd fled the country, assumed she was just another loose end that would eventually be tied up or forgotten. I never imagined, he gestured toward the sleeping baby, this. The note, Alina said slowly, raise what you destroyed. She wants you to care for the child born from a relationship you treated as transaction. She wants you to love what came from something you saw as strategy. He nodded slowly. Revenge, not through death, through forcing me to feel something, through making me responsible for innocence when all I know is violence. through giving me something precious and vulnerable that I have to protect even though protection isn't something I'm designed for. He looked at the baby again, and Alina saw the conflict written in every line of his face. The war between what he'd made himself and what this child needed him to be. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, and the vulnerability in those words was more shocking than any violence she'd witnessed. "I don't know how to be gentle, how to be soft, how to be anything except what I've spent decades becoming." Alina shifted the baby slightly, wincing as her shoulder protested. "Maybe you don't have to be different, maybe you just have to decide this child matters enough to try." Something flickered in his eyes, not quite hope, not quite determination, something between the two. "Will you help me?" The question was simple. The implications were not. "Help you how?" "Raise this child, teach me what it needs, stand between it and the world when I fail. Be what I can't be, provide what I can't provide." He paused. "I'm not asking you to do this as staff, I'm asking you to do this as," he searched for the word, "partner, equal, someone who stands beside me rather than behind me." Alina looked at the sleeping baby, then at him kneeling beside her chair with blood still under his fingernails and tattoos marking every act of violence he'd committed. "I need to know something first," she said carefully, "and you need to answer honestly." He nodded, granting permission for whatever question she needed to ask. "The woman who gave birth to this child, the one whose family you destroyed, what was her name?" His expression shuddered slightly, but he answered. "Her name was Sophia. Sophia Chen." "Why?" Alina felt the world tilt sideways, felt everything she thought she understood shift into new and terrible alignment. "Because Sophia Chen was my older sister." The silence that followed was absolute, complete. The kind of quiet that exists in the moment before an execution when everyone knows what comes next but no one can quite believe it's happening. He stayed kneeling, frozen, his tattooed hands now completely still. His empty eyes weren't empty anymore. They were full of calculation and realization, and something that might have been horror if he allowed himself to feel horror. "Your sister," he repeated slowly, as if testing the words for truth. "Sophia Chen was your sister, which means you've spent 8 months working in my house, serving me, knowing I destroyed your family, knowing I'm responsible for whatever happened to her, knowing." He stood abruptly, his hand moving to his waist where she knew he kept a gun even though she couldn't see it. "Why are you here?" The question carried weight. Threat. Suspicion earned through years of surviving in a world where loyalty was performance and betrayal was currency. Alina met his eyes without flinching. "Because I had nowhere else to go. Because after you destroyed my family's organization, I was left with nothing. No money, no protection, no future. I took this job because I needed to survive. I stayed because..." She paused, looking at the baby. "Because 8 months ago, Sophia contacted me. One message, one final communication before she disappeared. She told me she was pregnant, told me the father would never accept the child, told me she was going to leave it somewhere he'd have to deal with it. She made me promise that if anything happened to her, I'd make sure the baby was cared for." Understanding crashed through the room like a physical force. "You knew this was coming," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "You knew she was going to leave the child here. You positioned yourself in my household deliberately. You've been waiting for this moment." "Yes." Alina didn't apologize, didn't justify, just confirmed. "I promised my sister I'd protect her child. When the basket appeared, I kept that promise. Everything since has been keeping that promise. Everything going forward will be keeping that promise." His hand was definitely on his gun now. She could see the outline through his shirt. "You've been lying to me for 8 months, deceiving me, working in my house while planning. What exactly? Revenge? Sabotage? Waiting for the perfect moment to strike?" "Waiting to see if you'd accept the child," Alina corrected. "Waiting to see if you were capable of caring about something beyond strategy and violence. Waiting to see if the man who destroyed my family might be able to love the child born from that destruction." She stood carefully, her shoulder protesting, the baby still secure in her arms. "If you'd rejected the baby, I would have taken it and disappeared. If you'd been cruel, I would have found a way to remove it from your house. But you weren't. You've been trying. Struggling, failing sometimes, but trying. That's more than Sophia expected, more than I expected." She moved closer to him, close enough that she could see his finger resting near the trigger, close enough that he could kill her without effort. "So yes, I deceived you. Yes, I've been lying by omission, but I haven't betrayed you. I've been protecting what matters, the baby. That's all I care about. Everything else is secondary. He stared at her with those cold eyes, and she could see him calculating, weighing, deciding whether she was threat or asset, enemy or ally. Then slowly his hand moved away from the gun, not far, but enough. Your sister, he said carefully. Where is she now? Alina's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes went dark. Dead. She died 3 weeks after leaving the baby. Medical complications from the birth that went untreated because she was in hiding. She bled out alone in a room she'd rented under a false name. I found her body. I buried her in secret. I've been mourning her while raising the child she died bringing into this world. Something flickered across his face. Not quite grief, but not quite nothing. I didn't mean for that to happen. The massacre was strategic, not personal. She was never a target. If I'd known she was pregnant, if I'd known she was suffering. Would you have done anything differently? Alina challenged. Would you have spared her, protected her? Or would strategy have still trumped humanity? He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was brutally honest. I don't know, and that uncertainty is answer enough. The baby stirred between them, making soft sounds that suggested waking. Both of them looked down at the tiny form, this child born from violence and deception, and choices neither of them could undo. So what happens now? Alina asked quietly. You know the truth. You know I've been lying. You know my connection to the child goes beyond employment. What do you do with that information? He reached out then, his tattooed hand extending toward the baby with the same gentleness she'd seen before. The child's fingers found his automatically, wrapping around his index finger with that surprising infant strength. Now, he said slowly, we raise what I destroyed, together, honestly. No more deception, no more lies, just two people trying to give this child what neither of us had, protection, safety, maybe even something like family. Alina felt tears threaten for the first time since Sophia's death. You're not going to kill me for lying. I'm going to trust you because you protected my child with your own body, because you've kept your promise to your sister even when it put you in danger, because deception for the sake of protecting innocence is different from betrayal for the sake of personal gain. He paused, and something almost like a smile flickered across his face. Also because if I killed everyone who'd ever lied to me, I'd be very alone, and this child needs more than just me. Baby chose that moment to fully wake, its cry breaking the tension. Alina shifted carefully, starting to rock gently, and he moved closer, his hand supporting her injured shoulder instinctively. They stood like that for a moment, an unlikely family formed from destruction and necessity and promises made in darkness. I need to know one more thing, he said quietly. Your sister, did she hate me at the end? Did she leave this child here out of vengeance or hope? Alina thought carefully before answering. Both. She hated what you'd done, hated what you made her feel and then discarded. But she also hoped you might be capable of change, that becoming a father might force you to feel something real. She wanted you to suffer, but she also wanted her child protected. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. He nodded slowly, accepting this truth. Then I'll honor both. I'll protect what I can't undo, and I'll let the suffering be my reminder that actions have consequences beyond strategy. If this story has you hooked, make sure you subscribe right now so you don't miss a single moment of what happens next. Comment below and tell us what you think about this revelation and whether Alina did the right thing. Hit that like button if you're ready to see how this impossible family survives what comes next, because things are about to get a lot more complicated and you won't want to miss it. This is just the beginning of their journey, and the real challenges haven't even started yet.